A student of Buchanan University in the Department of English Language and Literature, and I'm in my third year. I will be chairing session 4, entitled Multiculturalism in Science Fiction. And I would like to introduce my first speaker. Onur Çiffiliz is currently a student of Hacettepe University in the Department of English Language and Literature. He is a third-year student in the department and doing a lateral study in the Department of Psychology. And he's interested in science fiction and fantasy genre and history of warfare. He will talk about Doomed to Fail or Not, Multiculturalism in Military.
I'm hoping this PowerPoint will catch up eventually. It's not opening yet. But when it catches up, I will just be coming to that. But I would like to start with saying that there are lots of armies in the world that rely on a multicultural pool of conscripts, and some of them are like today's NATO concept. They are multinational armies coming from different states, and they do not belong to one large entity, but I'm mostly going to be focusing on imperial armies that rely on multicultural and multinational soldiers, so it's going to be like that. And there are lots and lots of examples, but I'm going to be mostly using 2 examples from the Western world because the Eastern world is more complicated. And I would like to say that multicultural armies don't usually work very effectively, especially after their common goal or common enemy is conquered. They won't have much of a chance of surviving. And this, I believe, is because that most of the soldiers, and especially the commanders, tend to stick to their original cultural identities more than this newly established higher superculture issue. And it's not working. What are you doing? Please. It's dead. I'm just dropping it. It's not important. Okay, now, there are going to be 2 major examples before I go into the novel that I am going to be referring to, which is the Ender's Game or Ender's Saga by Orson Scott Card, an American science fiction author. And my primary example is going to be the Roman Empire and the Roman auxiliary system. The Roman Empire relied on an army of different groups, and they had legionaries that are Roman citizens and original Roman people from Italy, and they also needed other groups of people from different tribes, especially from Gaul, from Syria, and from Germanic tribes, and they used them for different purposes like cavalry, archers, and camel units, and elephant units, and so on. And these soldiers sometimes, in the conditions that were prevalent, turned against their own armies, but for the most time they stick together because they were kept together by a common threat, and they had an order and discipline, and they had personal gains in these armies because usually a position in the Roman army was quite well paid, or a position in an Ottoman army was quite well paid, and they will just stick to the army even though they don't like what they're doing. But when they break up because of personal expectations, because when you create a general, it gets a lot of power. He gets a lot of power, and lots of power means a lot of personal expectations, and they are usually not met in a Roman structure or an Ottoman structure, and they may also stick to their national loyalties, and also they're not in compliance with the cultural system. And here my example is going to be on Arminius, especially, a Germanic warrior of a tribe called Cherusci, and he was born in Germania about 10 BC, before the birth of Christ, and he was brought up in a very tense atmosphere where there was a lot of warfare going on with the Roman Empire and between these tribes. And his father, especially the Cherusci tribe's leader, decided to ally with Rome, and to ensure his loyalties, he sent his son, Arminius. It's not his real name. We don't know his real name. It's a Norman name. We don't know his German name. to the Roman Empire, and he was brought up by the Roman military system in Rome, and he knew everything about the Roman military structure, Roman politic structure, and he was well favored by the Roman generals, especially in his time, and he was taken up especially by Varus, the commander of the Germanic area, the Germania, and he was a governor there, and he took up Arminius into his army, believing that his knowing the terrain could actually help him conquer this area much better. But what happens is that Arminius has been holding a grudge against Rome for quite a long time because his friends and his tribe members were ill-treated and killed by Roman soldiers, so he used this advantage in 9 AD when the Roman army was marching through this area into the deep parts of the Germania, and here is a site of the Hacettepe forest, a very thick forest that's almost impassable. And the Roman army was supposed to skirt around this, but he organized a rebellion with his friends, unknowing to the Romans, and he pushed the Romans into the forest, believing that they will be safer in that forest. And there was a great ambush in which about 3 legions were utterly destroyed, and about 20,000 people were killed by the Roman side. And Rome was greatly humiliated in this defeat, and they always held a grudge against Germany. But what happened is that Rome's progress into Germania was stopped, and tribes like Danish tribes especially could thrive in this area thanks to Arminius' actions, and he is later considered to be a national hero in the 16th century because of this action. And until then he was quite forgotten, and Martin Luther revived this Arminius, named him Hermann as a stereotypical German name, and created a hero out of this. And that was a great problem for the Romans. And the point is that they created Arminius. The Roman system, the Roman multicultural army system created Arminius. So sometimes your own creations can turn against you. That's the point here. And I will also be talking about the Ottoman Empire, a more relative system to our own Turkey. And this Ottoman system relied on the devşirme, and these devşirmes were usually taken from their families at the age of 5 to 11 perhaps, from their native towns, and at the first time they were just taken by force, and eventually people started giving up their children because it was a prestigious position being in the Ottoman army, and it was quite well paid. And they could take maybe 1,000 or more boys from a province, and they would be taking them to the capital, testing them, and the less successful were just used as infantry, and more successful were taken into the palace schools where they were given the best possible training in that time in the Ottoman Empire and probably in the European context. They learned creative art, they learned military strategies, they even read Chinese sources. Like Sun Tzu, they learned lots of languages, some even could speak 11, 12 languages at the time. And they learned religion, and they learned maybe even orative skills, and they were quite successful in that. And here, my example is a part of this system. He is not a devşirme, he is not converted into Islam, but he went through all the process, even though he was not. And he was schooled in the palace, and I am talking about Vlad Dracula, the famous figure in Bram Stoker's novel, and we know him because of that, and he gives quite a trouble to the Ottomans. Well, his father was the king of Wallachia, or Transylvania we can call it now, and he was a vassal to the Ottoman Empire, and he had problems recently with the Ottomans, so he gave his son Vlad and his brother Radu to the Ottomans, the Sultan Murad, as a hostage to ensure his loyalty, just like Arminius. And Vlad was brought up in the Ottoman palace all throughout his life until the death of his father, which made him a free man, and he became an Ottoman general. And after the Second Battle of Kosovo, he was sent to Romania and Transylvania to reconquer these lands for the Ottomans. But what he did was that he allied himself with the Moldovians, he allied himself with the native people, and he started a rebellion against the Ottomans, and he did many atrocities like impaling people, poking their eyes out, and many other horrible things. I'm not mentioning all of them. But if you look for it, it's horrible, really. And he applied a psychological warfare against the Ottomans. And it is said that Sultan Mehmet actually went crazy for months after seeing his atrocities. And he probably stopped Ottoman advancement into Germania and that area for about maybe 50, 60 years, because he killed a lot of the Ottoman soldiers, and he created an anger in these areas against the Ottomans, and he just put a barrier to their progress into Europe. And because of that, some Romanians and some Austrians consider him to be a hero. But it's up to interpretation. And also, at the same time with Dracula, there is another man going through the same process, and that is known as Iskender Bey in Turkish, and Skanderbeg. And he is also known as George Castriota in Albania, and he's an Albanian national hero who also went through the same procedures. He was in the palace, he went to the same school with Sultan Mehmet the Conqueror, and he was quite good friends with him until he escaped and built his own army. So creating these multinational armies, multicultural armies, could become dangerous, and in history there are two great examples. There are many others, like American Continental Army was also such an example, because they fought the war together against the British for their independence, and after that these Native Americans especially started turning against each other and turning against the American government, and it can go like that. And now I am hopefully going to be linking all these to the Ender Saga, the science fiction novel series. And in these series, there is a threat of an alien invasion from the outside, from a species called Formics. They come to the Earth before the beginning of the novel, and they destroy almost anything. And after that, the remaining governments on Earth decide to build an international force to fight against them. And they decide to use a system just like the Ottoman Devşirme, an auxiliary system. They just pick the brightest children from the young people. They just take them through lots of tests, and they take 5 to 7 years old. They train them for 13 years in the best possible education ever for military personnel. But it is stated in the novel that they always feared what would happen after the war, because they believe that they could actually win this war, but they're always afraid what would happen. And because of that, probably the main character in Ender's Shadow series, the Bean, says that it depended too heavily on millions of soldiers and commanders being more loyal to the international fleet than their homeland. They always feared that in the novel. And also, there's a colonel that is responsible for the project, and he says that to another character, you know that the moment the Formics are defeated, IF will have no reason to exist, and it will try to continue to exist in order to maintain international peace. But the League is not politically strong enough to survive the national wins. So they're fearing that. And it also says that IF will break into fragments, and each will follow its own leader, because these children are from various countries and various national and cultural backgrounds. There are gypsies, there are Muslims in this army, there are Australians in this army, Americans and Dutch people, and French, and all possible combinations, and they all will eventually turn against each other, it says. And it actually happens the same way in the novel, and there starts a civil war at the end of these both novels, and the civil war continues for 7 more novels in the saga. So it's a horrible thing, and they come to reconciliation quite later. So this is my point, and this novel by Orson Scott Card actually sees the same point. So I am trying to say that probably creating armies from different backgrounds of people, especially under one single government, may become dangerous. But I'm not going to say that we shouldn't ever do that, because that will be something different. But always we need to be careful. And also, trying to create a superculture in an army structure is, again, dangerous, because we're talking about people who can actually fight a war, maybe with civilians we can actually create an utopic civilian world with multiculturalism and everyone being happy with what they are, but when you give people weapons and capabilities beyond imagining, like nuclear weapons and planet-destroying capacity, it can become a real problem, and that is my point. And I jumped these, actually. I don't know why, but these are the points that I took down. And I can say that Orson Scott Card is a prophet for telling these, as a science fiction prophet, because these kinds of things are actually happening today in the world. There are groups like NATO who are trying to fight against common threats, but sometimes they can just remember that they are different than the others and start sending them to the front. So alliances also can be a great problem, but again, at least they are states. But if you try to create a super government and super culture, that can become haywire. That was what I tried to say, and I think that's over. Thank you. I'm excited. Sorry about that. Actually, I was rushing through all this, and I'm excited. If I missed anything, I'm so sorry. And I can answer questions.
Question? When you look at the Turkish independence, or we see that there's a multicultural struggle army
Yes.
who fights around from different geographic locations, and it seems that it's pretty much a success story after the war. These three different bands were actually became the national army.
Yes.
So you talked about how a couple of factors, all the army together, I think discipline was one of them, other stuff. So when you look at all these, what do you think was the most critical factor that how to get
I think the most critical factor was the common threat before, because even after the independence war, I don't think that the threat against especially the Turkey's eastern part did not vanish, because there was still English invasion in Iraq and there was French in Syria, so threat was still there. And also they had a common goal, like trying to create a new country, a new thing, and also especially under the Ottoman Anatolia, these people did not have a state that can actually defend their rights, probably, and they felt quite a long time themselves as Muslims and nothing else. So a Muslim is their identity, and they start realizing their identity, I think, in quite recent times. And also, probably, there was no imperial, bigger system of creating an army. But these people were just brought together by the conditions at the time, but it was not a project of creating an army from different people. If they did that, it may not have worked, I think. Anything else?
We do not have any questions. Okay, thank you so much.